Hello students, welcome to the lecture on human rights, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Discuss about human rights, describe the history and generation of human rights, explain human struggle to achieve human rights, discuss the generations of human rights, and understand the political geography of human rights. History of human rights. Let us start with the history of human rights. The belief that everyone, by virtue of her or his humanity, is entitled to certain human rights is fairly new. Its roots, however, lie in earlier tradition and documents of many cultures. It took the catalyst of World War II to propel human rights onto the global stage and onto the global conscious. The Hindu Vedas, the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, the Bible, the Quran, and the Analects of Confucius are of the oldest written sources which address questions of people's duties, rights, and responsibilities. Originally, people had rights only because of their membership in a group, such as a family. Then, in 539 BC, Cyrus the Great, after conquering the city of Babylon, did something totally unexpected. He freed all slaves to return home. Moreover, he declared people should choose their own religion. The Cyrus Cylinder, a clay tablet containing his statements, is the first human rights declaration in history. 1215, the Magna Carta gave people new rights and made the king subject to the law. 1628, the Petition of Right set out the rights of the people. 1776, the United States Declaration of Independence proclaimed the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. 1789, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, a document of France stating that all citizens are equal under the law. 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the first document listing the 30 rights to which everyone is entitled. Universality. The principle of universality of human rights is the cornerstone of international human rights law. This principle, as first emphasized in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights in 1948, has been reiterated in numerous international human rights conventions, declarations, and resolutions. The 1993 Vienna World Conference on Human Rights, for example, noted that it is the duty of states to promote and protect all human rights and fundamental freedoms, regardless of their political, economic, and cultural systems. Universal human rights are often expressed and guaranteed by law in the form of treaties, customary international law, general principles, and other sources of international law. Cultural struggles over human rights. History tells us how people have had to fight for the rights due to them. The cornerstone in this struggle has always been political activism and people's movement, national liberation movements, peasants' movements, women's movements, movements for the right of indigenous people. Often, the burning desire of people to be free and to enjoy their rights started the struggle. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 was a breakthrough, ushering in a new era with the world community taking on realization of human rights as a matter of common concern and a collective goal of humanity. The global integration of nations and people has been a second breakthrough as a global movement has entrenched universal human rights in the norms of the world's diverse cultures. Over the past half-century, an international system of human rights has emerged with a rapid rise in commitments made to it in the past decade. In 1990, only two conventions, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination. The history of human rights is the history of human struggles. Let's move on to the next topic now. Struggles for human freedoms. Today, with impressive achievements and a significant unfinished agenda in human rights and human development, the struggle continues for realizing and securing human freedoms in 7 areas. Freedom from discrimination, for equality. Freedom from want, for a decent standard of living. Freedom for the realization of one's human potential. Freedom from fear, with no threats to personal security. Freedom from injustice. Freedom of participation, expression and association. Freedom for decent work without exploitation. Generations of human rights. There are 3 overarching types of human rights norms. They are civil political, socio-economic and collective developmental. The first 2, which represent potential claims of individual persons against the state, are firmly accepted norms identified in international treaties and conventions. The final type, which represents potential claims of people and groups against the state, is the most debated and lacks both legal and political recognition. Each of these types includes 2 further subtypes. Civil political human rights include 2 subtypes: norms pertaining to physical and civil security, for example, no torture, slavery, inhumane treatment, arbitrary arrest, equality before the law, and norms pertaining to civil political liberties or empowerments, for example, freedom of thought, conscience and religion, freedom of assembly and voluntary association, political participation in one's society. Socio-economic human rights similarly include 2 subtypes: norms pertaining to the provision of goods meeting social needs, for example, nutrition, shelter, healthcare, education, and norms pertaining to the provision of goods meeting economic needs, for example, work and fair wages, an adequate living standard, a social security net. Finally, collective developmental human rights also include 2 subtypes: the self-determination of people, for example, to their political status and their economic, social and cultural development, and certain special rights of ethnic and religious minorities, for example, to the enjoyment of their own cultures, languages and religions. Birth of the United Nations. The idea of human rights emerged stronger after World War II. The extermination by Nazi Germany of over 6 million Jews, Sinti and Romani, Gypsies, homosexuals and persons with disabilities horrified the world. Trials were held in Nuremberg and Tokyo after World War II, and officials from the defeated countries were punished for committing war crimes, crimes against peace, and crimes against humanity. Governments then committed themselves to establishing the United Nations with the primary goal of bolstering international peace and preventing conflict. People wanted to ensure that never again would anyone be unjustly denied life, freedom, food, shelter, and nationality. In April 1945, delegates from 50 countries met in San Francisco full of optimism and hope. The goal of the United Nations Conference on International Organization was to fashion an international body to promote peace and prevent future wars. The ideals of the organization were stated in the preamble to its proposed charter. We, the peoples of the United Nations, are determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind. The charter of the new United Nations organization went into effect on October 24, 1945, a date that is celebrated each year as United Nations Day. Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has inspired a number of other human rights laws and treaties throughout the world. By 1948, the United Nations new Human Rights Commission had captured the world's attention. On December 10, 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights (UDHR) was adopted by the 56 members of the United Nations. The vote was unanimous, although 8 nations chose to abstain. The UDHR, commonly referred to as the International Magna Carta, extended the revolution in international law ushered in by the United Nations Charter, namely that how a government treats its own citizens is now a matter of legitimate international concern and not simply a domestic issue. It claims that all rights are interdependent and indivisible. In 1950, on the second anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, students at the UN International Nursery School in New York viewed a poster of the historic document. After adopting it on December 10, 1948, the UN General Assembly had called upon all member states to publicize the text of the declaration and to cause it to be disseminated, displayed, read and expounded principally in schools and other educational institutions without distinction based on the political status of countries or territories. The political geography of human rights. An attempt to define basic human rights was made by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948 with its Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The declaration states that the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice and peace in the world. Human rights are not, however, universally recognized in practice. Violations of the rights and freedoms that Australians take for granted continue to occur across the globe. These human rights violations include genocide, torture, rape and imprisonment without trial. Australia's government has been criticized for failing to address, where able, some of these human rights violations. Virtually all governments feel ambivalent about political opposition. They all believe that they know what is best for the country, and they generally assume that others who oppose their vision are misguided. In democratic countries, these tendencies are kept well in check by popular pressures within civil society and by the functioning of other institutions such as the parliament and the courts. But in other countries, and sometimes even in democracies, the temptation to use improper means to silence opponents is often hard to resist. Political geography of human rights in the 21st century. At the dawn of the 21st century, the United Nations has become more central to the lives of more people than ever. Through our work in development, peacekeeping, the environment and health, we are helping nations and communities to build a better, freer, more prosperous future. They all, however, have committed themselves to the idea that no individual, regardless of gender, ethnicity or race, shall have his or her human rights abused or ignored. The United Nations achievements in the area of human rights over the last 50 years are rooted in the universal acceptance of those rights enumerated in the Universal Declaration and in the growing abhorrence of practices for which there can be no excuse in any culture under any circumstance. The role of non-government organizations. Globally, the champions of human rights have most often been citizens, not government officials. In particular, they have played a cardinal role in focusing the international community on human rights issues. For example, NGO activities surrounding the 1995 United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China, drew unprecedented attention to serious violations of the human rights of women. NGOs such as Amnesty International, the Anti-Slavery Society, the International Commission of Jurists, the International Working Group on Indigenous Affairs, Human Rights Watch, Minnesota Advocates for Human Rights, and Survivors International monitor the actions of governments and pressure them to act according to human rights principles. Summary. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. Originally, people had rights only because of their membership in a group, such as a family. Then in 539 BC, Cyrus the Great, after conquering the city of Babylon, did something totally unexpected. He freed all slaves to return home. The principle of universality of human rights is the cornerstone of international human rights law.